We were established 20 years ago. This is our mission statement, and what that really means is that we are handling this issue from soup to nuts, and we want to help everyone. So, victims, consumers, businesses, and government, we want to help minimize your risk of becoming a victim and then mitigate the impact if you do become a victim. And we are going to discuss both identity compromise and crimes. These are a little bit different, but it all feeds into this whole mysterious thing that is your digital identity and your identity credentials. One of the ways that we meet our mission is through our direct services. So we have a toll-free hotline. You can live chat with us on our website. We have a web-based help center. You can send us a message through SMS, text to chat. You can direct message us on social media. I'm trying to get carrier pigeons so that you can send us a message that way. Any way that you want to get in touch with us and get either free remediation assistance, or if you just have a question, maybe you've had some exposure to it, you've encountered a scam, or you don't know if it's a scam. Please, by all means, you can reach out to us, and there are a number of ways that you can do that. We also do a lot of research in this space. I'm going to share a little bit of that with you today. Some of the data that I'm using is from our own research, and we do educational events, much like what we're doing right now. So here are some of the things that we're going to discuss today, very, very broadly. We're going to begin with just a foundation of identity theft and the related crimes, and what does your identity really mean? What are some of the pieces of that puzzle? We'll look at some of the current trends in data breaches, cyber attacks, and identity theft, and then we'll talk about what the very common, a lot of the increases that we've seen in 2020 and more common identity related attacks, and then we're going to get to the what you can do about it. So I promise it will be worth it once we build that foundation at the beginning, talking about all the different types and how these things work. The tips on how you can protect yourself will be much more meaningful. So let's start with the two kinds of identity crimes that we're going to talk about today, because they're very different and it's often confusing. So there's identity compromise, and this is where your data or your identity credentials are exposed in some way. They are not necessarily being misused. They have just been exposed, and that can be through a data breach. It could be through your information accidentally being posted online, or maybe it even gets sent to the wrong person in the mail. Those are exposures. The misuse of your identity credentials, that's identity theft. That's when those credentials that have been exposed or compromised are actually now being misused by a thief. So let's talk about the different types of identity theft. There's financial identity theft, which is the one that most people are familiar with. It is by far and away the most common type. And this could be someone using an existing financial account that you have, maybe an existing credit card, or getting access to an existing bank account, checking or savings account. It could be someone applying for new loans in your name, things like an auto loan, even a mortgage, sometimes student loans. Then there's medical identity theft, and this is where someone uses your identity credentials to get medical goods or services. Most people think about things like hospitalizations or doctor's visits, and that is included, but it could be dental care. It could be for prescriptions at a pharmacy. It could be for durable medical equipment. So, things like a crutches or a wheelchair, or oxygen tanks. So anything that is within the medical sphere to treat a health condition, that's medical identity theft. Then there's criminal identity theft, and this is where your information is misused during the commission of a crime. So someone commits a crime and they give your information instead of their own information. And this can be anything from a moving violation like a traffic stop, a speeding ticket, all the way up to a felony. Now, this is not the most common type of identity theft, but it certainly does happen. We help people remediate these cases all the time, and it can be the most complicated and complex of these different types, because the remediation process will vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and you actually will have to prove that you are not the person that committed this crime and demonstrate, you weren't in that state or things of that nature. Good news is most people are able to get it resolved and they don't have a criminal record following them around for the rest of their lives, but it is a very cumbersome and time-consuming process. And the last one is government identity theft. And this is where someone uses your identity credentials to get government goods or services. And it can be anything from things like SNAP benefits or aid to families with dependent children. It can be filing a fraudulent tax return with the IRS using your data. And one of the things that we're going to talk about and do a little bit deeper dive today is the unemployment's identity theft, the unemployment's benefits identity theft, that we mentioned that a little bit earlier. It has been just an astronomical problem. We've seen it. We're still seeing it. It's not over yet. And I'll do a little bit deeper dive into that as well. And before we get started on looking at some of those more like case studies, let's talk about how does someone actually perpetrate those types of identity theft that I was just talking about. What is it that they're using? Well, they're using your PII, your personally identifiable information, and there's a couple of different categories that falls into. So I want you to think about your identity like a puzzle. And there's all of these different pieces that go into making up your identity. And in the core, in the center of that, are the really critical components, things like a social security number, a driver's license number, your financial accounts, your social security number. And then as you move out to the edges of that puzzle, that data is still relevant. It's still important because it makes up the whole picture and gives you a more robust picture of the identity, but it's not as critical as those things in the middle that I was just talking about. And so some of those attributes that are a little bit more over on the edges are things that are really more commonly known. So your name, your phone number, your license plate number, even your date of birth. We really don't keep that a secret. And even though it's part of our identifiable information, it isn't something historically that we've ever just kept really close to the vest. But there's another type of identity data that I think most people don't think about when they think about their identity, and that's their biometrics and biometric behaviors. So your biometrics, things like your fingerprints, facial recognition. We don't think of photographs of us as a biometric, but it is. It's something that you are. That's what your biometrics are. And it can get very granular. Even, I mean, they have things like a voice print, an ear print, your gait, the way and the manner in which you walk. Those are all things that are unique to you. And then your behaviors, your spending habits, your browsing activity, your geolocation on your phone, if you have that turned on all the time. Those behaviors are becoming a more critical part of your identity. They are going into that digital picture of you, and they can be used both for the positive and for the negative. If you think about if you've ever gotten that call from your bank that says, hey, there's someone, are you filling up at a gas station in New Mexico? And you're saying, no, of course not. I'm here in Hawaii. That's not me. Well, one of the ways that your bank is able to tell that that might be an anomaly is because they know what your normal spending and purchasing habits are. They know that you don't normally shop at these places or spend that much money or buy this type of merchandise. And that I know has a little bit of a creepy feeling. We feel like that's very invasive. And there are a lot of conversations around our privacy and how much data is being collected about us. But I do want to give you some food for thought that while that data can be used for nefarious purposes, it certainly can, it is also used for legitimate purposes, and it's used in a lot of fraud detection analytics. So now that you have that good foundation built and you understand a little bit more about how all of these pieces fit and how they work, let's talk about some of the current trends. And I'm going to ask if everyone could please mute their microphone. There's a lot of background noise coming through from somewhere. That's great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So let's talk about some of these current trends and how the big increase in both fraud and identity theft and what's been fueling that. Um, this is data from the Federal Trade Commission, and you can see that we had some very big spikes in 2020, both in just general fraud reports and also in identity theft. That top blue line is overall fraud, and the orange line at the bottom is the identity related fraud. And ID theft reports, they actually doubled in 2020. And I think it's important to understand that we didn't start at a baseline of zero. Those numbers were already high when we were coming into the pandemic, and the pandemic just exacerbated so much of the fraud and identity theft that we're seeing. So, what were the factors that were influencing that? Let's think about, we had this fundamental shift to a lot more online engagement. We had this fundamental shift from work from home. We had a lot more people in the workforce. And then we had this very disorienting national scale event, external event. And that really led to a lot of opportunities for the scammers. You know, from charity scams to disaster scams to even the fake cleaning products and fraudulent medical care types of scams with phony tests and fake cures and things of that nature. Really, whatever your scammer whatever their mode is that they wanted to use, because they do have a tendency to stay in that niche, uh, it was available. The opportunity had presented itself because we had so much confusion. And if you think about sort of the anatomy of a scam and how there are some common components to scams, and one of them is confusion. If there's a lot of confusion around a process or an event, they will capitalize on that. And there was a lot of confusion around what was legitimate information about the availability of things like uh, testing and vaccines and cures, and much of that is still ongoing. There was a lot of confusion around the relief, the economic stimulus, and the relief packages that were being put out. In fact, we just issued another scam alert today regarding the grant scam on Facebook that is proliferating again, telling people they're getting direct messages that's saying you're eligible for this economic COVID-19 economic relief. And the reason that that works is because there are a lot of legitimate programs. So it's very hard for us to tell the difference between the ones that are legitimate. We've heard things in the news, so there might be a kernel of truth to it, and the scammers will then capitalize on that kernel of truth. And then the last thing that I'll focus on that they do is they create this sense of urgency, whether it's you're going to miss out or there are going to be consequences if you don't react right now. And the reason that they do that is because, look, one, it's very effective, and it engages the emotional part of our brain. When we are in our emotions, I'm scared, they are saying they're going to come arrest me, or I'm fearful that I'm going to miss out on this opportunity and I have to act right now. Our The emotional centers in our brains do some really good things for us, and they help to keep us alive. That fight or flight part of our brain has really protected us for a long time. One of the things it's not good at is making logical choices and making logical decisions. I'm going to ask again. There's a lot of background noise. If people could mute their mics, please. Mute your microphone on your device. Great. Thank you very much. And where was I at? The logical center of your brain. That's the brain. That's a part of our brain that we want to engage when we make good choices, but we can't be in both places at once. And the scammers know that. So they will create that sense of urgency to get you in an emotional state so that you're not making logical choices. Now, when I was talking about all the data that was being used to perpetrate those scams, I just want to do a really quick overview. This is some information from our most recent data breach report. The ITRC has been collecting information about publicly reported data breaches since 2005. So we have a lot of information. And just to clarify, I'm not talking about information about the breached individuals. I'm not talking about individual consumer data. I'm just talking about the number of breaches, what was the company name, what industry are they in, how many records were compromised, that type of information. And if we focus on these two things, breaches and exposures, you can see that even though these things are trending down right now, that's still a lot of data. So for breaches, there were over 144 million individuals impacted in all of the breaches in 2020. Now, data exposures are a little bit different. This is where your data was exposed in some manner. The best example I can give is if some company has a database with information about their customers and they decide to put it in the cloud instead of keeping it on a server, and they accidentally don't configure it the right way. So it's now open, and anyone who knows where it is could go and view it. It doesn't necessarily mean that that data has been uh, exfiltrated, that any bad guy actually saw it. We just know that that's a possibility because it was exposed. And that in back in 2020 affected 155 million individuals. So a lot of people being affected, a lot of credentials out there that are helping to fuel this the secondary part of the pandemic. It's the scamdemic. It's the misuse of all of our identity credentials for scams and identity theft. I just want to touch on this very quickly, only because sometimes people think that they don't have any valuable data or credentials, or that they have very few. Um, it's not just your financial data that's valuable to the thieves. Look at this. A hacked Gmail account is worth $155 on the dark web. So getting those identity I'm sorry, not identity, but those user accounts, the username and password for these different accounts is very lucrative for the thieves. And if you think about it, with your Gmail account, it's your email is really tied to a lot of your other behaviors. That's where your password resets come in. So if someone can get your Gmail account and get those credentials, they can really control a lot of the aspects of the rest of your digital life. Now let's talk about some of the common attacks and how we can spot them, how we can figure out that this is what's happening. These are the most common types: phishing, scams, data breaches, lost and stolen devices, and then we get down to mail theft and actual physical document theft and shoulder surfing. Those are simply not as prevalent anymore. They still happen. Analog attacks happen, but a lot of it's much more digital. And we're really going to focus today on the phishing and the scams. Now that report I was talking about where we collect the data breach information and issue a report, this was one of our findings. And I think this is really relevant to this group that's listening right now, because this cyber attacks were the top threat vector, the top type, and within that, phishing and business email compromise was the top cause. And this is something that we can control as individuals. Oftentimes when we're talking about cyber infrastructure and things of that nature, some of those things are outside of our control. But lowering the number of successful phishing and business email compromise attacks is actually something that we as consumers and individuals, our behaviors will make a huge difference on this. And so we can have a dent. We can make a dent in this, in reducing this number. You are in control. So let's talk about what it looks like for those of you that don't know with phishing. This is where the scammers will impersonate. Sometimes they'll impersonate you or a business that you trust. Trust is another vital component for these scams to work. So you might get an email that appears to be from a retailer that you have a relationship with. Maybe it looks like it's from from Microsoft, or from directly from Outlook, or even from Zoom, and it looks legitimate. And what they're trying to do is get you to either click on a link and enter some data, or to download a document that can infect your computer. And sometimes clicking on the link, those can be laced with malware or viruses as well. So it's really about getting access to your data, whether you're typing it in because you're saying, oh, I have to do a password reset for this account, or you're opening something up so that that virus can infect your device and then collect that information as you're typing it in at a later date. And again, phishing is generally email, but these kinds of incoming contacts they can come through text, it can be a pop-up, it can be a direct message on your social media account. And remember that even if it's directing you to a website that looks really well done, those can be very easily faked. I want to go through a couple of examples here because I really do want to make it clear that when it comes to phishing, and when it comes to emails in general, if you didn't initiate the contact, your best practice and the way that you can reduce your risk the most is by going back to the source. By simply saying, I won't engage this way, I'm going to go verify it at the source. For example, you get an email that says it's from your bank and you weren't expecting the email, maybe you don't even have alerts set, and it says there's an issue with your account, click here to log into your account. Your best practice is to not even click on that email, don't engage. If you already have an online account with your bank, go to that login page, go to that known URL. If you do it through your phone, go to the app, engage that way and see if your financial institution is trying to get in touch with you. And the reason that I say that is we used to teach people how to spot phishing emails because they were so bad. They actually were very easy to spot and see, but they've gotten very sophisticated. And we don't want to give people a false sense of security. But I do want to give you a couple of clues on what are the ones that you can just automatically say, I know that's a scam. So here's an example of an email that was sent to our COO and purporting to be from our own internal IT department. And it says it's from the IT center, the ID theft center notification desk. But look at that email that it's actually coming from. Doesn't even look like the ITRC's email extension. We knew right away that this was not actually, coming internally because that is not an email that's even associated with us. Here's a couple of more examples of that same thing. And believe me, the trusted brands, the fake emails that appear to be coming from trusted brands are just huge right now. And so this looks like it's coming from Amazon, but you can see these highlighted email addresses they are not Amazon. That's not an Amazon extension. Very easy for us to look at that and just go, that's not really from Amazon. So there is no doubt in our minds that this is a scam. And again, what I want to hit home for you is when in doubt, go to the source. If you can easily look at these things and you are comfortable enough engaging when you're engaging online to spot those things and be able to say, nope, I know that's a scam, I don't even have to engage, that's great. But when you get to the ones where you're in doubt and you're not sure, really, you don't want to engage. You want to go to the source and go directly to them and verify and say, hey, are you trying to get in touch with me? Or go to your Amazon account, the known URL, and log in that way. And let's talk about some of the common scams that we've seen. Romance scams absolutely proliferated in 2020, but our baseline was not low. They were growing at a pretty substantial rate prior to the pandemic, but they really ballooned. And a big part of that was because people were isolated and looking for connection. And this is where the scammers will set up fake dating profiles and they look really great and they engage with you and move very quickly. That is one of the red flags. They will move very quickly into a full-blown relationship. There's very little getting to know you time. And they will then profess that, you're it. They want to get married. They want a long-term relationship. And very shortly thereafter, they will ask for money in some way. Sometimes it's, I want to come see you in real life. Can you buy me a plane ticket? I've had a business event and I just need to borrow some money. Can you help me out with that? Now, they've already established and built this trust with you. You think that you're in a relationship and you want to help out. And so people will give them the money. And then they will continue asking for it. It will be excuse after excuse, reason after reason. And as long as you keep giving them money, they'll continue to engage with you. But as soon as you stop giving them money, they cut off all communication. And unfortunately, people are losing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in these types of scams. So if things are moving very quickly, if you have never met them in real life, and if they start asking you for money, that is a huge red flag. And we had really advise people to start looking into some resources for not falling for a romance scam. Of course, we're one of those, but really keep an eye out for those red flags. And then with the various phone scams, I mean, they have really proliferated, and they can be anything from a government agency. Those really grew this last year because of the confusion with the economic relief programs. A lot of calls purporting to be from the government, purporting to be from the IRS. Things like, hi, I'm calling about your economic relief payment. I need to verify that uh, I need to verify your identity before we can send that payment to you. Can you please give me your social security number, your date of birth, all of these things over the phone. And people did it because they thought that was the process. So whenever you get one of those phone calls and you think, okay, I don't want to miss out on this, you don't need to engage with that caller. And please don't don't call them back. Say, okay, I'm going to go to the source and then call that number back. That defeats the purpose. You want to find out, well, hey, what government program are you talking about? Who is funding that? I'm going to go directly to the government websites and get more information on that program and see if it's real and if I'm eligible. And then with the grandparent scam, um, look, it can be any relative, a niece or a nephew, but it's very common where our senior citizens will be getting calls purporting to be from a grandchild who's in distress and in need of financial assistance. And the reasons vary. I was injured, I was on vacation, and I got arrested, or I've been in an accident. But one of the key components is they always say, don't tell mom and dad, don't get the rest of the family involved. And what we want to encourage people to do, again, it's going to the source. If you're getting a call from your grandchild at a number that you don't recognize and it doesn't even really sound much like them, but they're saying they were injured, call their phone. Get in touch with them through another method. And if you can't get in touch with them, by all means, get the family involved. Call their parents. Eventually, you're going to want them involved anyway, but call their parents and just make sure that's really who you're talking to, because so often, more often than not, it's actually not the relative that you think you're talking to. And then with the prize scams, look, there are legitimate sweepstakes and lotteries in this country, but most of these that are going to be calling you and notifying you out of the blue are just completely fake. As far as foreign lotteries are concerned, they're illegal in the United States, so you actually can't win a foreign lottery in the United States. And this whole thing about telling you that you have to pay the taxes on the winnings up front, that too is completely inaccurate. If you did truly win the lottery, they take the taxes out of the winnings. They don't make you pay them ahead of time. And they certainly aren't going to make you pay them through the use of gift cards. That's another huge red flag. So, and let's talk about another threat vector, and that's the lost, stolen, and hacked devices. I think it's really important for people to realize that we've gotten pretty good, or we've gotten better about recognizing how important it is for us to protect our desktops and even our laptops, that they have a lot of information about us, and we really should have passwords on them and antivirus software and malware detection software. But we don't necessarily feel the same way about things like our mobile phones, our tablets, or even USB drives. It can, if you're putting a lot of data on them and carrying them around, that's somewhat hard to keep track of. And if it is lost or stolen, then that is opening up your risk. So there are things that you can do through these attack vectors that will minimize your risk, but far and away, please keep in mind that your cell phone, your mobile device, is actually a small computer. In fact, it probably has more data and information about you than your actual computer. And now, what everybody's been waiting for. Now that we understand where all of these things are coming from and how identity works, let's talk about what you can do about it. How can you minimize your risk? First and foremost, please upgrade your password. Um, I know people have a lot of different password accounts. It's getting kind of hard to manage, but the best practices currently are one password, unique password per account. So you should not be reusing the same password over multiple accounts. And if that's difficult to manage, by all means, and if you feel comfortable with it, use a password manager. If even that you're going, I still have too many, it's hard for me to keep track of them. I'm going to tell you to go ahead and write them down. Now, writing them down is not technically your best practice. It doesn't minimize your risk as much as memorizing them. However, if your choices are that you're going to use the same weak password over multiple accounts, or you're going to write them in a notebook and keep them in a secure location in your home, in a locked drawer, in a locked filing cabinet, somewhere that not everybody has access to, you are much better off. You're reducing your risk in a much more significant way doing it that way than if you're using the same password over multiple accounts. And it doesn't have to be this crazy gobbledygook. It can just be, it needs to be 12 characters or longer. That it takes forever to crack one of those. It takes a really long time. Um, but it can be something that is personal to you and memorable. A book quote, a song lyric, a movie quote, just something that you're going to remember for that particular online account. And again, doesn't have to be the crazy nonsensical stuff. And also, look, this space is very dynamic and best practices change pretty rapidly. So we've talked a long time about frequently changing your password. And now we're looking at it going, actually, that is not having the intended effect, because what happens is people change it too often. And so they just revert back to simple passwords. So you don't have to change it as frequently. You don't, every 30, 60, 90 days, you don't have to do that as long as it's a unique password. It's 12 characters or longer. It will be very hard to crack. And you only have to change it if you get some kind of notification. Maybe it's a data breach notification that that account was compromised. Then by all means, you need to change that password to a new password. But other than that, you can keep them for a much longer period of time. Multi-factor authentication. This is another great way to minimize your risk. Not a lot of people know exactly what this is or what it's called, but I bet you've actually encountered it in your life. And this is where you are logging into a website or an app and you have your username, you have your password, and it says, hey, we're going to send you a code, a special code, and it can go to either your email or it can go to your device and come through as a text. And once you enter that code, you can then get into your account. It's an additional layer of protection. And sometimes, maybe you guys have encountered this, sometimes, especially for your bank accounts, for financial institutions, if you get a new phone or you get a new laptop, uh, your your bank will know, hey, that's a new device, and we need to make really, really sure that this is you, that you are authenticating yourself. And by the way, authentication just means verifying that you really are you. And this is one more layer. And so you were forced at that time. You had to put in that code. They said, we're going to send it to the known cell phone we have on file or to the known email. And you couldn't get into that bank account from that device without entering that code. That's mandatory multi-factor authentication. But it is opt-in. It is available in a lot of different places. They just don't make it mandatory. And so I'm going to encourage everyone to go ahead and opt in on as many accounts as you can. It really doesn't take that much longer. It's honestly 5 seconds longer, and it is an extra layer because that way, even if your username and password are breached, as long as your email and your phone aren't breached and aren't compromised, they can't get in because only you're getting that code, that MFA code. We've had a lot of conversations around digital wallets because contactless payments really grew exponentially in 2020. A lot of folks just felt more comfortable because they didn't have to be pulling out their credit card, signing, you're just waving your phone over it. But people are still a little bit leery. I just want to explain that this is a safe process, payment process. When you enter your credit card into a digital wallet, it stays in that device. It doesn't go anywhere else. So it's very similar to carrying your credit card around in your wallet. It stays there. Now you're just carrying it in your phone and it stays there. But the extra layer of security is that when you go to pay, when you wave that over the point of sale machine, that your actual credit card number is not shared. It's a one-time use kind of token or virtual number that's shared, and it expires after the transaction. So if you've been hesitant, I would encourage you, do a little bit more homework, look into it. But digital wallets, they can be a very secure method as long as you're keeping your device secure. And that feeds into this next point. Um, if as long as you are not the weakest link and you are protecting the devices that you use, if you haven't already, please add the PIN or the biometric lock to your devices. I know some people will say, well, it's really inconvenient. It shuts down. I don't want to have to enter it. But that way, if you do lose your phone or if it is stolen, only someone who knows the PIN, or and in the case of biometrics, it doesn't even work, but only someone who knew the PIN could get into the device. You've effectively turned it into something that really doesn't have any value to the thief if it's locked. And then also add the Find Your Phone feature. Make sure you have that turned on in your phone because that will allow you, one, to find it if it's misplaced, but two, if you do discover that it's been stolen and you know that you're not going to recover that, you can restore it back to factory settings right then and there, from your computer or from another tablet. You can restore it back to factory settings and wipe all the previous data. Now you've really turned it into it's a brick. It doesn't have any information about you. And please remember to add antivirus software on your phones, especially iPhone users. There's a little bit of this false sense of, oh, iPhones can't get a virus. Well, they actually can. They can be infected. It is less prevalent on iPhones than it is on Android devices, but that doesn't mean that they're impenetrable. So please add those things on your phone. Treat it like you would a computer. And then applying your software updates and patches across the board. So that's on your desktop, your laptop, your tablet, your phone. So when a phone says, hey, we've got a new update, go ahead and do those updates right away. When you get that pop-up on your computer that says it's time for you to apply your updates and update your machine, please do so. In fact, you can set it to auto update so that it will just automatically do those updates. The reason that this is important is because those patches are addressing known vulnerabilities. What that means is that the makers of the software and of the hardware have said, ooh, we just found a vulnerability that thieves could exploit. We need to fix that. So from the moment that they issue that patch and acknowledge that vulnerability, they have not only have they given you the solution, but they've told the bad actors, hey, these are vulnerabilities. So the clock is actually ticking for everybody that, okay, we now know this is a vulnerability we can exploit. Let's see how many people actually patch this right away. And if you follow this at all, you'll hear about conversations about, yeah, they didn't do a patch for a year. So they left this thing exposed for a year thinking that no one would exploit it. It's a really easy, simple way to minimize your risk in a meaningful way. And then, of course, social media accounts. And I'm keeping mindful of the time. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. Please just remember that the default privacy settings on your social media accounts is open to the world. So don't rely on those default settings, and please go check on them. Please don't overshare. You don't need to tell everyone in the world, um, share everything that you're thinking with everyone in the world. And if you wouldn't put it on a billboard in front of your house, I would say don't post it on your social media account. And it's not one and done. They can change those privacy settings as long as they notify you. And they know we're creatures of habit and we're a little bit lazy, so we don't read those anyway. So check on those settings and make sure that you understand where your settings are and how they're set at least every 6 months to make sure that you're being very privacy centric in your life and you're not oversharing on your social media accounts. And then, of course, we just saw the Social Security number challenge. It's a real thing. People saying, quick, what's your Social Security number? And then they post a random number, seeing if they can get people to post their Social Security numbers. Please don't post sensitive information on social media, even as a joke or thinking that it's funny or not dangerous. You never know. Even if you have good privacy settings, remember, people can take screenshots and save things. Once it's there, it exists in perpetuity. And then just general scam avoidance. I go back to this again. If you didn't initiate the contact, don't provide information, even if they have some information about you. One of the clever ploys that the scammers will use is go, well, can you verify? We have the last four of your social or the last four numbers of your credit card. Can you verify that that's correct? And can you give us the remainder of the numbers? Please don't engage. Don't provide that information, even if they have a little bit of information about you. Um, don't deposit unsolicited checks. This is still a common scam. It's an overpayment scam where someone will say, hey, um, either buying a product from you or for whatever reason, they run the gamut where they go, okay, let me give you $500. Go ahead and deposit that. Give me back the 300 and you can keep 200 for yourself. And you say, sweet, sounds like a great deal. Problem is it's not a good check. And it's going to be written in such a way that it's sophisticated enough that it may pass the initial verification at your bank, but eventually they figure that out. And so then you are left with, well, the $500, you certainly don't have that. That check wasn't any good, but you've already sent $300 out. And a lot of times they're going to ask you to wire the money or to use prepaid gift cards. That is a huge red flag. When you are engaging with someone or doing business with someone and they will only accept a wire or prepaid gift cards, walk away, because those are the ways that you cannot claw the money back. Your credit card, you have some protections. You can do chargebacks. You can dispute it if you don't get the goods and services. You cannot do that with a wire, and you cannot do that with prepaid gift cards. And also with a lot of these payment apps. So things like Zelle, these are good processes and they work very well. They are secure, but you need to know who you are giving the money to. So we recommend that you don't use those apps or those processes if you're dealing with someone who's really a stranger or not known to you. It's one thing to send your mom, hey, thanks for lunch. Here's some money for lunch. You know that's going to your mom. But if you don't actually know who the recipient it is, we would say avoid that. And then, of course, my last bullet point, I sound like a broken record, but when in doubt, go direct to the source. Don't engage, go back to the source. And then very quickly, we've talked a lot about digital, but analog still happens too. So keep an eye on your documents and keep them as secure as you possibly can. If you have a lot of traffic in and out of your house, lock them in a locked filing cabinet if possible. And you don't need to carry everything with you. You're certainly not your social security card, but honestly, ladies, clean out your purse, guys, clean out your wallet. Make sure you're only carrying what you need for that day. And then shredding documents. Sounds a little antiquated, but I promise you it's still an issue. There's still divers. There's still people trying to get paper documents with that information. It's not as prevalent as all of the digital stuff, but it still does happen. And it's a really easy thing to do to make sure that you're not compromising your information. And then lastly, just some general tips. Review and freeze your credit if you haven't already. This is a great proactive protection, consumer protection process because you're essentially freezing out anyone other than you from opening new lines of credit. If you have any questions about that, we have tons of information on it, but it's one of our big recommendations. And then don't forget to ask for help. Look, there are plenty of free services out there. Identity Theft Resource Center is one. The Federal Trade Commission is another. You've got this amazing state consumer protection department that I'm sure can help you with a lot of questions. Don't feel embarrassed or ashamed. This is a complicated space. I don't like to say that people fall for scams because I think that's just wrong. You were lied to, and you can't help that. You can't help that someone lied to you. So don't be embarrassed or ashamed. Ask for help. And with that, we have about 10 minutes left for any questions. And I'm going to try to unshare my screen. So Jackie, are there any questions coming in?
I don't have any so far, but I have a question. If you believe someone has been lied to, say during a romance scam, they're not convinced that it was actually a scam.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any tips on how you can actually help them?
Well, that is very particular to the person. And we have dealt with this before where people relatives have actually used us to be that third party that says, "Hey, I'm listening to all of this and it sounds like it's not legitimate." We've participated in sort of, for lack of a better word, interventions where you get a group together saying, okay, we've listened to all of the circumstances here, and we really do believe that this person is not legitimate and this is a scam. I think my recommendation for people that are dealing with this for a family member would be that to kind of seek help and see if getting an outside third party who has some credibility in this space might help convince your relative. I do remember one time we had a gentleman who was, his son was very worried that he was falling for a romance scam. He was former military, the dad, and had a lot of respect for law enforcement. So when we were able to get one of the local detectives to actually go and sit down with the dad and say, I think this is what's happening to you, he had the credibility and the trust of the dad because he's like, I believe law enforcement when they tell me these things. And so they were finally able to convince him. So I think it'll take a little bit of sleuthing and detective work of knowing the relative that you're dealing with and who are they going to trust and who can help for them to see what's actually happening, but also be really compassionate. With the romance scams, those emotions are real and people do feel like they have a relationship with that person. And so there's a grieving process. And aside from the lost money, there's a grieving process because that relationship is real to them.
Okay, thank you, Eva. We have some other questions. The first one is any recommended apps for the mobile antivirus protection?
Well, I actually cannot recommend specific companies, products, or services. That's outside of the scope of our mission. But NCSA, the National Cybercrime Alliance, they have a website, and Jackie, I'll send this information over to you so you can send it to the listeners. And they have this great program called Keep a Clean Machine, where they actually do make recommendations and they're a nonprofit charity organization, so they don't sell anything, which is why they have credibility in this space. So again, it's the Keep a Clean Machine program where they make recommendations about different apps and different types of apps and products.
Okay, thank you. There's one more. Can you speak to who should consider a credit freeze for prevention?
I'm so glad somebody asked that question. Yes, I can. Everyone should consider a credit freeze, please. A couple of years ago, there were some considerations about credit freezes really not being for everybody. Maybe they were a little inconvenient, and in some states, you had to pay for them. So there was the cost factor. But a couple of years ago, we had new legislation that makes them free for everyone, and that includes your children. So yes, it's a little bit inconvenient. You have to take the time. It doesn't take that long. You have to have your documents together. But really, you can get it done at each bureau, 15, 20 minutes with each bureau. For kids to do your children's, it's a little bit longer. But the thing is, it's totally worth it. It is totally worth it because um, even if you are in the market and trying to build your credit and trying to go get new credit, all you have to do is thaw it when you're seeking it. And the process is pretty seamless. It doesn't take long at all. I mean, it's generally a matter of minutes. So you want to go buy a car, your credit's frozen. You ask the dealership, hey, which one of the bureaus do you use? They tell you. You call, you do it in your app, however you communicate with them and say, hey, thaw my credit, and now they can run your credit. And you know that only you are able to do that. It is Everyone should consider it. It doesn't cost anything, and I'm really going to tell parents to consider it for their children as well.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions. So I want to thank Eva for being here today to help us understand a little bit more about identity theft and the things that we can do to protect ourselves. So I just wanted to let you guys know that tomorrow we'll be having Sheila Sharma from the Office of Consumer Protection. She'll be talking about COVID related scams. And on Thursday, we'll have volunteers from the SHIP program talking about Medicare and youth. And on Friday, we'll have Brian Shaughnessy from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service talking about mail fraud. So please join us again tomorrow. Thank you all for coming again.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day and stay safe out there.
Okay, thanks, Eva.